might want to put the link in the chat at some stage. She's also acting head of geography and teaching, learning and assessment lead at Prendergast School. And she's also on the post-16 committee of the Geographical Association. Warm welcome to Hina, Key Stage 4 Geography Coordinator and Rights Respecting Schools Lead at the King John School, and is also an elected trustee of the Geographical Association. Steve Brace, good morning Steve, Head of Education and Outdoor Learning here at the Royal Geographical Society. And last but not least is Cath White, who is former senior lecturer in the Department of Geography and Environmental Sciences at Northumbria University, and is also recipient of the RGS Taylor and Francis Award for sustained contributions to teaching and learning in HE, supporting geographers through their transition across different stages of education. So thank you ever so much for joining us this morning. Okay, now I know some of you have already raised some questions when you registered for the conference. So I'm hoping that we will have time to deal with those. But also, if there are any comments, then please do continue to put them into the chat, and we will feed them to our distinguished panel. Okay, so I'd like to introduce the, well, I've introduced the panel, but I'd like to ask the panel in turn in terms of to reflect on their experiences of support and diversity through that transition between educational phases. So let's go for one of the teachers first. Let's start with Ellie.
Everyone, yeah, I'm Ellie Hopkins. I work at Prendergast School, and yeah, I started the YouTube channel Curious Geographer, which is really about, I'll talk about it in a second, like trying to get students to the next stage and just increasing geography outside the classroom. I do actually have two of my wonderful Year 12s here who've just popped in, so if they're just listening to it, they're not going to be on screen, but if there are any questions for students, then I can always discuss that and feed them back from you to you. So I suppose I've always been interested in uni transition, particularly born out of conversations in the classroom, and that is actually one of the reasons I started the YouTube channel as well. I think the RGS has always been a fantastic resource for us as a school. In my last placement at my last school, we'd always go to the Going Places conferences, and students always got so excited when they actually heard from real students, and I always felt that like students who weren't in London, like what opportunities were they getting to maybe speak to different universities, or those kind of, would they be able to go to the RGS? I was at a school in Hammersmith, so we just took the bus for 20 minutes, which was fantastic. And then I also would speak to my students, and I found that a lot of students, particularly in the London schools that I taught in, would always go to London universities. And part of that was actually maybe not even having the ability to sometimes visit further places. So some of them would talk about that they couldn't maybe afford to go on a train to go up to see the university, parents couldn't take days off, and actually a lot of students that I taught liked being in a city that was so diverse and that they knew, and it wasn't having to make that an extra step of being further. So I found that mostly by the time I get to Year 13s, 50% of my cohort are normally in London universities, and that's kind of one reason why I worked with universities on my YouTube channel, is to just get students thinking about what is it like to study at university, hearing from a range of different voices. And in the autumn term, I kind of did interviews with unis and student voices. And I thought the aim is hopefully to get not just Year 12 and 13s listening to it, but also the younger years, because it's on YouTube and an open platform, and they're not having to be like, oh, I'm looking at universities, I need to go into the university websites. And many students have reached out to me on social media about their transition, or like commented on YouTube. And I think that now there's so many fantastic resources. There's already been in the chat, Geo, the RGS resources. I'm going to stop now because I've been going on. But yeah, that's kind of my interest in it and some of the experiences for my students. And I spoke to them about some of the questions coming up, so I'll feed them back.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ellie. Hina, what's your experiences?
So if I go back to myself, as being East African Asian, it was quite unusual when I went to university to do geography. You know, I think Asian girls are quite in the forefront of going to university in the first place, but they go and do medicine, they go and do dentistry, they go and do accountancy. So to do geography is quite unusual, and that was 20 plus years ago, and I don't think much has changed in that sense. So for me, a lot of it for students and diversity particularly is getting students from different ethnic backgrounds and their parents to understand the importance of geography, and the fact that it is actually a STEM subject, and sort of going down that route of the importance of that. And I've taught Key Stage 5, I've taught A-level for quite a lot of years, and I'm in a school with varying levels of diversity year to year, and it is quite unusual for us to have students from ethnic minority backgrounds do geography A-level. So it's sort of understanding why that is, trying to change and onwards really to build that in, is the idea of children's geographies. What's important to them? What do they know about things that are important to them, and important to their families and important to the way they've been brought up, and how can that apply to going on to university to do geography? So a lot of it is about making sure they realise why it's a good subject to do, where it can take you, and why it is so diverse. But then within school, we do a lot of stuff on transition, but a lot of it is based on how to apply to university. But we need to sort of work on what is the right university for you, which we do a fair bit of. But, you know, I've got 3 students in the room with me as well. And one of the things I said, well, how do we know that we're going to be accepted where we go? You know, do we need to worry about racism and things like that? So looking at universities where they have societies for students gives them an idea of the numbers that go there. They don't want to be the only black or brown face standing out, which I was, and it was fine for me, but it can be a difficult situation for people. And I think things like our NEA, that geography has quite uniquely, this independent investigation, I think is quite a good thing to lead through to university. So looking at, you know, getting them interested in the topics they want to do for that, but also that wider reading, and we try and do a lot of that as well. And the other thing I'm trying to introduce a lot of is to get professors from universities to speak to students. Where we've got more online things going on, that's much easier to do. And actually what I didn't realise is that you guys are actually really happy to do that. I didn't think that was something that you were out there wanting to do, but actually you are. So I intend to use the links I've got to get my students more enthused and understanding what it'd be like to be at university, but especially those from those diverse backgrounds where their parents might think, why do you want to do geography? You know, that's not something that's going to be helpful. Well, yes, it is. This is why. And we had a really great talk a couple of years just before COVID from one of our parents actually, who is a professor in climate education, in climate at King's College. And she did this amazing talk about the relevance of geography and where you can take it, which even us as teachers are like, we didn't think of some of those things. And it was absolutely brilliant. And some of our students from there was like, yes, why aren't we considering A-level? And then went on to do so. So I think those kind of things are really, really important.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hina. That was really insightful. Steve, can I bring you into the conversation? What's your experience in the RGS?
Thanks, Alan. And nice to, sorry I couldn't join earlier, but nice to see lots of familiar names. And I just caught the end of the students talking. It was really insightful too. I'm going to stand quite far back from some of this and just sort of talk around some of the challenges and I think some of the dilemmas and tensions we probably all face from our different perspectives around transition. The irony is that if young people go into university, geography experiences the 3rd highest level of course completion, second only to medicine and dentistry and veterinary science. It has really good rates of course completion. When young people graduate, 75% of geographers go on to professional roles, and geography performs very well in terms of the utility of the subject going forwards, and never mind the innate value and relevance and all the things we celebrate about our subject. And yet, when we look at the young people who are moving through from GCSE to A-level and on to university, as Hina's already mentioned, we don't, as a subject, reflect the country we're within. We're seeing really good and positive change at GCSE. We now have 50% more young people studying GCSE in England. There's about 265,000 entries every year for GCSE. We have about just somewhere between about 30 and 35, depending on whether one's counting Wales and Northern Ireland, entries at A-level, and about 6,500 entries going on to university. The growth at GCSE has come largely from students who previously wanted to study geography. Those from low incomes, Black, Asian, minority ethnic students, and those studying in non-selective schools. That's fantastic to see at GCSE. We've seen a doubling of the rates, for example, of admittedly from a low base, but a doubling of the rates of Black and Black British students studying geography at GCSE. Yet when we get to A level, those rates fall, and ethnic minority students and low-income students are underrepresented if you norm it all out for what you would expect at A level, and it falls further at university. I think there's about, in 2018, I'm going to put a link into the research report we did at the RGS called the Geography. In 2018, there were just about 100 students from Black and Black British backgrounds going on to study geography at university. And that's completely unreflective of the potential audience for our subject. So there are other issues around transition in terms of, if we touched on earlier, style of study, whether you're doing it from home or moving away and so on. But I think there's something amongst our community of geographers that we do need to address quite sharply in terms of ensuring that our subject appeals to all at the various transitions, and that we can actually capitalise properly on the more representative audience we have for GCSE to support young people going from all backgrounds going on to A level and then subsequently on to university. Because people have read Danny Dorling's work. Geography is one of the, frankly, the poshest, whitest subjects at university. I don't think that's a situation any of us would be pleased to support. So sorry to have killed the joy, but that's some hard statistics about where we currently stand as a subject.
Okay, thanks.
I'll
Steve.
put the link in.
Thank you. You've made some really interesting points there about universities. So, Cath, what's your experience from a university perspective? Oh, you're on mute, Cath.
Yes, I'm now a visiting scholar at Northumbria, and I've taught in the geography department for 22 years. And I had, before that, 10 years teaching experience in schools. So I've been really interested in the transition from school to university. And I was involved with 2 projects examining aspects of this transition. The first one, which I organized with Helen Walkington, who was then the lead of the HEA in Geography and Environment, took place in October 2013, entitled Student Transitions from Schools to Universities within GEIS Disciplines. And it involved the meeting of 16 teachers and 13 academics. And they were given space to discuss academic tensions around transition. The academic perspective suggested that first-year undergraduates lacked certain skills and an ability to focus on processes, while the teachers argued they were severely constrained by the national curriculum, the GCSE and A-level requirements. There was a useful group discussion on the different ways in which schools and universities could work together, with a variety of plans for the future being discussed. The second project was done in 2014 with colleagues from the business school, and again looked at the academic transition to university. It was the project that sought to identify and understand the academic transition challenges faced by sixth form students on entrance to university. The aims were to identify approaches used by the students to prepare for university, and again to identify teacher and lecturer perceptions of the academic transition. There were focus groups with the school staff discussing how they prepared students for university, and the academic staff were interviewed on their perception of level 4 student skills. Finally, the school students were asked about which academic skills they thought would be required at university. There were 926 students from 6 schools, and of these, 3/4 of them planned to go to university. 2 of them were studying for the extended project qualification, and they believed that this would help develop the skills that they needed for university. Students acknowledged in their questionnaires that they would need to be more independent in studying at university, and they were looking forward to studying one particular subject. The students also suggested that independent study, listening, self-organization, and time management would be the most important academic skills for university. There was a gender difference in these results. Females were more likely to rate listening, self-organization, and time management as important skills, where males were more likely to rate note-taking as being the most important skill they could see. The least important skill was seen to be negotiating, followed by IT skills, numeracy, self-evaluation, and reflective practices. So this work was very much echoing some of the things that Peter and Simon said this morning about the importance of academic reasons for going to university. And I really am very interested in the emphasis that they presented on the social importance now, and the importance really of of emotional geographies. Although I retired from teaching at Northumbria University in 2016, I've been chair of the Tyne and Weir branch of the GA until 2019. And I've talked to different teachers from our branch, and also to Professor Catherine Cassidy from Northumbria about the questions we were asked. And we have a number of online lectures by academics, which we are happy to share on our YouTube channel, and invite anyone who's sort of in the area to come and see us. We're doing online lectures at the moment, but we hope to be doing them in the flesh towards the end of the year. So really, that's my background.
Fantastic, thank you, Cath. That's really good. Okay, so I know the chat has come alive. Just a quick look in the chat briefly. Thank you, Ellie, for posting the YouTube channel link, and from Linda to everyone. That's so awful. No, awesome. Sorry, couldn't resist it. Thanks, Linda. Simon, hi to Hina and everyone. Happy to do those sorts of talks online, makes it so much easier. So that's really good. Steve has posted a link there to people regarding what the RGS is doing. And also Alan Kinder as well from the GA, also looking at transition, and a useful link there to the Geography Journal. So fantastic. Now, although I've got these bank of 3 questions, I'm very conscious that we do have students, Hina and Ellie. So I'm going to break with tradition slightly, and really we've heard about kind of transition and experiences from teachers, from lecturers, from geographical associations and bodies. What about the students' experience? What about their kind of hopes and fears of going to university? Let's start with Ellie.
Yeah, so I've got 2 students here, but I also asked all my year 12s and 13s. I did a little questionnaire with them and talked about their hopes and worries, and also why they picked to go to university. And although it's a small sample and just in my London kind of classroom, it was really interesting that the students that I teach, the highest proportion, the reasons why they wanted to go to university was top to be most employable. Then it was kind of followed by career and new experiences. Now, these were all my geography students. They weren't just necessarily going on to study geography. However, a lot more of year 12s were thinking about it, and we normally get kind of 20% each year kind of doing geography, 25%. And but the main thing they were looking forward to was, which everybody said, was that independence, and whether that is whether students were learning, going to still be at home, but I think kind of moving forwards in terms of independence. And I think I need to speak to my two here as well. But I think some of the worries were that they were really worried. I've put some comments down here about the workload, not being able to, they said, some of them said they were not knowing whether they would be as knowledgeable as others. And then some of them did speak about, which we've kind of touched on, why students maybe go to, say, London universities, is that anxiety of maybe if they're going to a new place, not knowing what everybody is like and how they're potentially going to fit in. But we also talked about whether that's subconsciously, whether they think about that before they actually apply, and therefore many of my students go to London universities. I had a few things to add on. I think that one thing which has kind of come up before is that these social connections with people who have been to university and also social media is hugely influential. I didn't actually realize that students were getting ideas on what university was like in terms of how inclusive it was from places like TikTok, and actually kind of that we actually taught as a class that even if a university might look very diverse on a brochure, that both sets of my students were very aware that they might have just kind of cherry-picked students to make it look like a certain picture. And so I think students are quite critical in the fact of what do they see from maybe real life people or brothers or sisters who have been to university, and then also maybe what they're being presented with from the media from the universities themselves. But that social media was hugely influential in their perspectives. I'll go on mute now and just check if the Mighty have anything else to add on to that. So I don't know if Hina, if you want to jump in with your views.
Yeah, so just talking to my students there, I think for some of them, the idea that, if they've been in one school all the way through, which 2 of them have been here from year 7, one joined year 12 this year, it is that sort of idea of getting used to new staff who are going to have a different relationship with them. They might not see them that often. It's sort of how that professor-student relationship works. But also the concern, I think, you get this idea of university where you're going in and you're being lectured, and actually they want it to be interesting. They want to know that there's going to be interaction, that they're going to be asked questions, that they're going to be able to ask questions themselves. And I think, that's the kind of thing that isn't necessarily always clear. And I just said to them at the start, when I think it was mentioned earlier about 12 hours, did you know that the courses were, some of them were only going to be that many hours in, but they were like, no, we didn't know that. I was like, well, yeah, and that's something to get used to. And I think as schools go, we've got a massive sixth form college nearby, and a lot of students stay on with us because they like the structure of school. We have private study sessions, we have places they should be working quietly, which makes them carry on. But then that jump to university then, where they've got to manage their own time, is quite massive. And it's sort of, how do you learn to deal with that when we're not letting them have that experience in school, because we want them to do the best that they can. And while they like that in the school setting, and actually the students that go to the sixth form college actually that didn't work for us, there's got to be that sort of link between the two things somewhere. It's obviously that idea of fitting in. The hope is that the social aspect will be really good, but it's picking that right university, and what information have they got to have that right, to have that in place, is something they're concerned about.
Fantastic, thank you, Hina. Ellie, did your students want to?
Yeah, I think they just said, sorry, I've still got my hand up, that I think for them it's the fact that maybe everything changes at one time, and that can be like the biggest jump that some of them talked about. Obviously the workload is going to change, and that independence, and maybe not knowing exactly what to include, and maybe what everybody's looking for if you don't have that kind of teacher interaction, but mainly the everything changing at one time. And then linking, I think Alan wrote earlier about that field work might not be on the exams next year, or might be changing. The NEA we found has been, our students did it actually during lockdown, and they have all found that so valuable. It's definitely something we're going to make sure that all our students complete as well. But I think they've actually found the NEA as an opportunity to have that independence and to carry a project all the way through. So I think those skills are really valuable for preparing students in the future, and it's been really nice to see that growth and independence in their learning.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really useful. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes to run, so quick fire questions now. So firstly, one of the questions was around kind of racism and anti-racist pedagogy in geography, and in terms of dealing with issues, then how does this work within perhaps a school setting compared to universities? So Cath, if you wanted to respond in terms of university perspective.
Well, I was going to talk actually about a school perspective rather than the university one, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine.
Is it? Okay. I talked to a head of geography at one of our nearby comprehensive schools, and he felt that here in his particular school, anti-racism in the school curriculum was a common thread throughout all the teaching in all the years in terms of stopping potential racism and educating students about overt racism. But he said, and I know there's a lot being written about this, that there was a move towards a less biased curriculum, but it was very much the responsibility for each particular department. So he was working on that, and he very much recommended a particular article in Teaching Geography by Charlotte Milner called Classroom Strategies for Tackling Whiteness in Geography. And I found it very interesting and useful myself. I wondered what anybody else did.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Cath. Steve, you mentioned maybe a lack of diversity and a perception that geography is a predominantly white middle class kind of subject.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting. I think we're in a really interesting time where both university colleagues and school colleagues are looking at these issues, and there's some development of some interesting partnerships and possibilities across both. So, for example, the RGS is working with Pat Noxolo, as our colleagues from the GA, around the Carrick UK project, and that's a really interesting sort of footprint across both schools and universities, university contexts. I think some of this stuff is quite challenging because it's not simply looking at a scheme of work, say from a school point of view. It's also thinking about some of the theoretical constructs and concepts that underpin geography as a discipline. And we've been doing, and people have probably seen on the RGS website, we've been doing some work to look at this institutionally from RGS as an organisation. Anybody who's read anything on the history of the RGS and similarly the history of the development of geography as a discipline, you see it's intimately involved with empire, with colonisation, and with, frankly, pejorative views of the world developed over history in terms of that. And that's something that, our academic conference 3 years ago now was called Decolonising Geography, and was looking at that from a HE point of view. So I think there's significantly more work to do in this area. And I think there's also interesting conversations to be had about and within geography in terms of these issues, but also in terms of how the subject presents or otherwise, and can be made more appealing or otherwise to students who are currently underserved and underrepresented by it. There's an argument that might say that if you look at STEM subjects, they're not necessarily going through this re-evaluation of what it means to do the discipline from a decolonising point of view as much as some other subjects are doing. And if one looks particularly in the school context, probably perhaps even less so. And yet, many STEM subjects recruit Black, Asian, minority ethnic students by the ton, and that may not be to do with, I'm not trying to set up a binary opposition, that may not be to do with representation within the subject. It may be to do with perceptions about utility of the subject and value of the subject, both in terms of its innate worth of studying it and what it means for you going forwards beyond school and university and then into professional context. So I think there's some really interesting, quite difficult and layered conversations around all of these things. I really don't think there's a white bullet, a silver bullet on it, but I think there's going to be lots of interesting and sometimes quite challenging conversations to be had amongst all of us as a subject community.
Fantastic, thank you, Steve. So is this something that the students have experienced, or in terms of perceptions or concerns about race within geography, within university? Is there any reaction from the students that are present? Ellie?
Yeah, I've actually, well, we were just speaking to the students here, but I also, before this, spoke to a student who was at UCL, who I used to teach for A-level geography. He's now in his final 3rd year. And he, particularly from his experience, was that what he loved about UCL was that he had lecturers from around the world speaking about their topic of interest. So he mentioned that he had, I've got it written down, like a digital technology unit in India, and the lecturer was from there. And he just thinks that I think they started to really broaden their curriculum when he started there. He mentioned that in the 1st year, they talked about kind of decolonizing and having a range of different speakers. And he reflected on his years at geography as a geography student in A-level. And yeah, he also did a lot of environmental justice at university. He kind of wished that there was some of those trends that could be explored at A-level. I've kind of quickly spoken to the students here, and I think it's quite hard for them, and without like that comparison, to also critique what the subjects they're doing. However, they have mentioned that kind of across the curriculum, that sometimes if they're learning about other cultures, they're learning it from that Western perspective, and actually the more that they can read from literature from actually people who are in those places, the more valuable it can be. So I definitely feel there's scope to, but it's still very much, I know Hina is on the Decolonizing Geography group and has done a lot of work on it, but as a school we've done work with a Prosperity project as well, and that has been really valuable, but I feel it's very much still the teachers are kind of directing their own study and having to decolonize their kind of classroom resources where they are able to.
Brilliant, thank you. Hina was nodding in agreement there. So Hina, what's the reaction from your students?
Yeah, it's similar, I think. Thank you, guys. He sort of said, you know, the idea that, yeah, you're being, it's that concern about going to university and standing out, but is the subject going to sort of be talking about those issues in the right way? And I think it is really important to have sort of variety of people talk to them. This is one of my year 13 students who white background, and she wants to do international development, and she's thinking of taking a year out, and she's like, well, you know, I want to go and do some charity work, but I don't want to go and be a white savior. And it's sort of that aspect of it, you know, she completely got that, I don't want to go and do that kind of thing, but it can sort of be seen like that. You know, we're talking from that, well, not me personally, people are talking from that white perspective, and it is sort of, you know, that white, so look what we've done, look what aid can do for these people, rather than taking into account what's actually going on. But the other thing to remember is those students from those backgrounds, they haven't necessarily been to those places themselves. You know, some of them are coming from families that are trying to, for want of a better word, westernize. So they don't know about those issues and those things, and they want to learn about them, but we can't, but also some of them just are oblivious to them as well. So it's sort of making sure you don't go too far in the other direction and trying to incorporate everything you think they want. Without checking what they want. But I think with geography at university, every geography course is different. I think it's quite important that students understand that, and when they're looking at where to apply, look at what options and modules are on offer. Because like Eddie said, you know, got a student who's at UCL that's got lots of diverse lecturers, etc., and it's quite important for them to see that. And where geography is so varied, and it can be physical and human, but within those it can be so much more, it's really important that they are looking to see what universities are actually offering, because some will offer those diverse elements much more than others, just from the nature of who they've got there. And I think we're great as a subject like that, because you can pick one strand and go with it. And it's really, really good that because there's so much there that we should be attracting a lot more students than we do, in my opinion.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, now I do realise that we are very close to time here, so apologies if you've sent questions in and we didn't get time to ask the panel, but I think we've got some indication about kind of differences and intersectional identities, and how people might manage the transition, and also we've learned a little bit today about how potential issues around the pandemic has impacted on students studying geography at university. So, so from Cath and Steve and Ellie and Hina and students that are present, thank you ever so much. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation, and I'll hand back to Lauren and Ruth.
So just to say a big thank you, really. So thank you to all of the organising committee for helping put today together. So thank you to Matt, Niall, Alan, Heather, Ruth, Harry and Cath. Thank you to our fantastic keynote speakers, Peter and Simon, for such an interesting reflection on the intersections between academic and social transitions. Really, really valuable. I've used your work a lot with my own students, and they said to me anecdotally in seminars things like, we didn't really think about transitions until second year, until we were introduced to these ideas. So there's such powerful pieces of writing, so thank you. Thank you to Niall and Matt and the students who kindly share their experiences and perspectives. Listening to those we teach is hugely important in supporting and empowering children, young people and everyone who's taught in their academic and social journeys in and through schools and universities. Thank you to Alan for chairing the panel, and to Ellie and Hina for sharing your work with school students and their families, significantly in their families as well. I think that's a really important area on transitions, and considering students' rich and varied backgrounds and needs and the inequalities and injustices they faced. Steve, thank you for sharing your wide lens view to help us to examine the geography of geography and to think how we can individually and collectively challenge injustices in geography education. Thank you to Cath for highlighting some of the barriers teachers face, for example, with regards to the curricula. As Simon and Peter pointed out, things have changed with things like the LCAB, but teachers, I'll let Ellie and Hina speak as well, but teachers are sometimes constrained by policy, and to thinking about students' views on it. So transition is varied and diverse, and it really matters. For me today has really highlighted the importance of dialogue between children, young people and all those who are taught, also between teachers, academic, policy makers, learner societies and subjects associations, and thinking about how we can challenge injustices in education and support and empower our students in and through their education. So I'll let Ruth finish if she wants to say anything, but just to say thank you to everyone. I hope you have a good day ahead. We'll be here for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to say anything, but we're looking forward to carrying on the conversation in one way or another. Thank you.
Yeah, just to wrap up with the thank yous. Thank you so much to Lauren for all the work she did to organise this event and the overarching planning of things, and to reiterate my thanks to everybody who Lauren has already listed. And also thank you to everybody who attended today. I think the conversation in the chat and the conversation, the verbal side of things has been really interesting and really valuable. So thank you everybody. Have a good rest of your day.